What if the son you raised, the boy you poured your heart into, turned out to be a monster capable of betraying you in the cruelest way imaginable? Imagine nurturing him through scraped knees and teenage rebellions, only to have him stare you down with cold eyes, demanding everything you've built, your home, your legacy, your very dignity. And when you say no, he doesn't walk away. He strikes back with a vengeance that shatters your world. That's the nightmare Maggie Vance faced on a sweltering afternoon in 1985, in the heart of Texas, where family bonds were supposed to be unbreakable. But as the humid air hung heavy in her sprawling ranch estate just outside Dallas, the storm gathering wasn't from the skies, it was from the greed festering in her own bloodline. Before we continue, take a moment to share where you're listening from and subscribe to the Ageless Bold Stories channel. I truly love seeing our stories reach across so many places and hearts. Together, we're creating a space where every season of life still holds its own wonder, its own turning point. Now, let's ease ourselves back into the story. The Vance Ranch sprawled across hundreds of acres of sun-baked earth, dotted with mesquite trees that clawed at the sky like old arthritic fingers. The main house was a testament to hard-won success. A grand two-story structure with wide verandas, polished oak floors, and walls lined with family portraits that whispered of generations past. But on this day, the air inside felt thicker than the August humidity, charged with an unspoken tension that made Maggie's skin prickle. At 62, she was still a force, tall and wiry, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a practical bun, her blue eyes sharp from years of managing the estate, after Beau's stroke left him confined to a wheelchair. She sat in the main parlor, the ceiling fans whirring lazily overhead, stirring the scent of fresh-baked cornbread from the kitchen. Beau was beside her, his once strong frame now frail, his hands trembling slightly on the armrests as he watched their son pace the room. Chip Vance was 40, but he carried himself like a man who'd never grown up, entitled, impulsive, always chasing the next big deal. His tailored suit was rumpled, his tie askew, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead, not just from the heat, but from the desperation etching lines into his face. He'd inherited Beau's height and Maggie's determination, but twisted it into something selfish, a relentless drive for more that had led him into a string of failing investments. Real estate flips gone sour, oil ventures that dried up faster than a Texas creek in summer. Now he was drowning in debt, and he saw the family's mineral rights, the untapped wealth beneath their land, as his lifeline. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk," Chip said, his voice clipped as he stopped pacing and planted himself in front of them. He pulled a sheaf of papers from his briefcase, the kind with legal jargon that made Maggie's stomach twist. Darla, his wife of 15 years, hovered in the doorway, her arms crossed, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and designer dress, a stark contrast to the ranch's rustic charm. She was always there, egging him on, her eyes gleaming with the same hunger. Maggie leaned forward, her hands folded in her lap, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's this about, Chip? You said it was urgent." But she already knew. Whispers from the family lawyer had reached her. Chip's creditors were circling, and the mineral rights were the only asset liquid enough to bail him out without selling off the land itself. He thrust the documents toward her, his fingers white-knuckled around the edges. "The mineral rights, Mum. I need you to sign them over to me. It's just a transfer. Nothing changes on the surface. The ranch stays yours, but I handle the drilling deals. It's a gold mine down there, and my investments, they're close to paying off. This will cover everything." Beau shifted in his wheelchair, his grey eyes narrowing. He hadn't spoken much since the stroke, but his mind was as sharp as ever. "Son," he rasped, his voice weak but laced with disappointment. Those rights are for the family, for your children someday, not to patch up your mistakes. Chip's face flushed, a mix of anger and shame twisting his features. Mistakes? You think building something from nothing was easy for you? You had it handed to you, the Vance name, the inheritance. I'm just trying to keep up. Maggie's heart ached at that, the first emotional peak crashing over her like a wave. How had it come to this? She'd raised Chip with love, sacrificing her own dreams to ensure he had every opportunity. Sleepless nights nursing him through fevers, cheering at his football games, even mortgaging part of the ranch to send him to college. And now here he was, reducing their life's work to a bailout fund. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back, her voice firm. Chip, honey, we've helped you before. Loans, advice, but this? The mineral rights are the heart of this place. Your father and I built this estate from scrubland. It's not just money, it's our legacy. He slammed the papers down on the coffee table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Legacy? What legacy? If I don't get this, everything crumbles. My business, our reputation. You'll lose it all anyway if the banks come calling. His eyes darted to Darla, who nodded encouragingly, her lips pressed into a thin line. Sign it, Mum. For once, think about me. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavier as Maggie's fear turned to a simmering anger. The second emotional peak, a fire igniting in her chest. She thought of the years she'd spent as a young wife, working alongside Beau to turn barren acres into a thriving ranch. The calluses on her hands, the miscarriages she'd endured before Chip came along, the quiet pride in watching the land yield its secrets. No, she wouldn't let greed erode it all. She glanced at Beau, his face pale but resolute, and drew strength from the man she'd loved for 40 years. No, Chip, she said, her voice rising with conviction. I won't sign. This isn't about helping you. It's about saving you from yourself. Find another way. Chip's expression darkened, his desperation morphing into something uglier, more primal. He stepped closer, towering over her, his breath hot and ragged. You don't understand. I need this now. He grabbed the pen from the table, forcing it into her hand, his grip bruising her wrist. Maggie gasped, pulling back, but he held firm, his face contorted with rage. Beau reached out weakly. Stop, son. Just please. But Chip ignored him, his eyes locked on Maggie. The third emotional peak hit her then. A heartbreaking realization that the boy she'd cradled was gone, replaced by this stranger willing to hurt her. Betrayal stabbed deep, sharper than any knife as memories flooded her. Chip's first steps in this very parlor, his laughter echoing through the halls. How could love turn to this? Tears streamed down her face now, unchecked, as she whispered, Let go, Chip. You're scaring me. But he didn't let go. Instead, he nodded to Darla, who moved swiftly to the utility room door, her heels clicking ominously on the floor. If you won't sign it here, Chip growled, his voice low and menacing, maybe a little time in the dark will change your mind. The heavy door to the storm shelter creaked open, revealing the concrete ramp descending into blackness, and Maggie's blood ran cold as she realized what he intended. The words had barely left his mouth when Chip's hand clamped around the back of Beau's wheelchair like a steel trap. Darla lunged forward at the same instant, her manicured nails digging into Maggie's upper arm hard enough to bruise through the cotton of her blouse. Time slowed to a sickening crawl. Maggie's mind screamed no, even as her body was yanked upright. The fountain pen clattering to the hardwood floor and rolling under the settee like a coward fleeing the scene. Chip, honey, stop this right now. Maggie's voice cracked, half command, half plea, the way it used to when he was 8 and about to do something reckless on horseback. But the man hauling his father's wheelchair toward the utility room wasn't 8 anymore. He was a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. Beau tried to brace his feet against the floor, but the stroke had stolen the strength from his legs years ago. The wheelchair wheels squealed in protest as Chip shoved it forward, bumping over the threshold into the narrow back hallway that smelled of laundry soap and old leather. "You're hurting him," Maggie cried, twisting against Darla's grip, feeling the younger woman's breath hot against her ear. "He'll live," Darla hissed, venom dripping from every syllable. "Unlike us, if those creditors get their hands on everything. Keep moving, Maggie." The storm shelter door stood open like the mouth of a grave. It was a brutal thing. Thick steel painted the same dull green as army surplus, set into a concrete frame that Beau himself had poured back in '62, after the Carlisle tornado took half of Waxahachie. They'd always called it the bunker, half joking, stocking it with water, canned goods, a battery radio, and a chemical toilet, because you never knew when the sky might turn mean. Never once had Maggie imagined she'd be dragged toward it by her own flesh and blood. Chip wheeled Beau right to the edge of the ramp. The old man's knuckles were white on the armrests, his breathing coming in shallow, panicked bursts. "Son," he wheezed, "look at me. Look at your daddy. This ain't you." Chip's jaw flexed, a muscle jumping under the skin. For one heartbreaking second, Maggie thought she saw a flicker of the little boy who used to fall asleep on Beau's chest after long days branding cattle. Then the flicker died, replaced by something cold and dead. "You stopped being my daddy the day you decided that dirt and oil under it mattered more than your own son," he said, and shoved. The wheelchair rolled down the steep concrete ramp with terrifying speed. Maggie screamed as Beau disappeared into the shadows below, the chair crashing against the far wall with a metallic clang that echoed like a gunshot. Darla used the moment to wrench Maggie forward, forcing her stumbling down the ramp after him. The air changed instantly, cool, damp, earthy, the way a cellar smells after rain. Maggie's knees buckled when she reached the bottom, and she dropped hard beside the overturned wheelchair. "Beau, oh God, baby, talk to me." She scrambled across the gritty floor, righting the chair with shaking hands. Beau was slumped sideways, one hand pressed to his chest, but his eyes were open, glassy with shock and pain. A thin line of blood trickled from his hairline where his head had struck the cinder block wall. "I'm here, Mags," he rasped, voice barely above a whisper. "Ain't dead yet." Above them, Chip's silhouette blocked the rectangle of light at the top of the ramp. Darla stood beside him, arms folded, looking for all the world like a woman watching pests being exterminated. "You think about this real hard tonight," Chip called down, his voice echoing strangely in the concrete tomb. "Cold gets into your bones down there. No heat, no light, no bathroom, but that bucket in the corner. Tomorrow morning, if you're ready to sign, I'll come let you out. If not, well, there's enough peaches and beans on those shelves to last a month, maybe 2. Maggie surged to her feet, fury overriding fear. "You open this door right now, Chip Vance. I'm still your mother." "Not for much longer if you don't start acting like one," he shot back. Then, almost gently, he added, "I love you, Mum. That's why this hurts me more than it hurts you." The lie hung in the air like smoke. Maggie opened her mouth to scream every curse she'd ever swallowed for the sake of propriety, but the heavy door was already swinging shut. The clang of steel on steel was deafening. The deadbolt shot home with a finality that stole her breath. Then the light vanished, plunging them into absolute suffocating darkness. For a long moment neither of them moved. The only sounds were Beau's laboured breathing and the soft plink-plink of condensation dripping from a pipe overhead. Maggie's legs gave out and she sank to the cold floor, reaching blindly until her fingers found Beau's hand. It was ice cold and trembling. "We're gonna die down here," Beau whispered, the words so soft she almost missed them. "No," Maggie said fiercely, even as terror clawed at her throat. "No, we are not. That boy does not get the last word on our story." But in the pitch black, with the chill already seeping through her clothes and the smell of damp earth closing in, Maggie felt the first fingers of real panic squeeze her heart. Because for the first time in her 62 years, she wasn't sure she could protect the man she loved. And somewhere above them, footsteps retreated across the hardwood floor they had sanded and polished together 40 years ago, leaving them buried alive in the house that was supposed to be their forever home. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was a living thing that pressed against Maggie's skin and crawled into her lungs with every breath. The storm shelter had been built to keep tornadoes out, not to hold people in, and the concrete walls drank every scrap of warmth. Within an hour, the damp had soaked through her cotton dress, through the cardigan she'd worn for church that morning, straight down to her bones. She could hear Beau's teeth chattering beside her, a sound that cut deeper than any scream. She found the crate of canned peaches by feel, dragged it over and eased Beau onto it like a makeshift bench. He was too weak to protest much, only a soft grunt when she lifted his legs so his feet wouldn't dangle on the cold floor. Then she felt her way along the shelves until her fingers closed around the old camp lantern they kept for emergencies. A miracle, the batteries still held a charge. When she clicked it on, the weak amber glow felt like the first sunrise after the end of the world. Beau's face in that light was grey, the cut on his forehead already crusted dark. His eyes, though, those pale blue eyes she'd fallen for in 1947, were wide open, fixed on her with something close to wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe they were here either. "I'm sorry, Mags," he whispered, voice rasping like dry leaves. "Should have put a phone line down here. Should have done 100 things different." "Hush that talk." She knelt in front of him, cupping his cold cheeks the way she had when he came home from Korea, with nightmares and a purple heart. "We're alive. That's what matters right now." But alive felt fragile. The air tasted metallic, thick with the smell of wet earth and fierce sweat. Every drip from the pipe overhead sounded like a countdown. Maggie's mind raced through possibilities, the way it used to race through cattle prices at auction. The shelves held food, water, a first aid kit, blankets, even a battery radio that probably wouldn't pick up a thing 10 feet underground, enough to last weeks. Chip had planned this, or at least the cruelty of it had occurred to him the second she'd said no. That thought sat in her stomach like spoiled milk. She wrapped 2 wool army blankets around Beau's shoulders, tucking them tight the way she'd tucked Chip in when he was small and afraid of thunder. The memory stabbed so hard she had to press a fist to her mouth to keep from sobbing out loud. Time lost its edges, minutes, hours, impossible to tell. The lantern's glow carved a tiny island in the blackness, and beyond that circle there was nothing but the slow drip, 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 and the sound of Beau's breathing growing more shallow with every cycle. Maggie sat on the floor between his knees, resting her head against his thigh like she had 1,000 times on long drives home from Dallas, when he'd still been strong enough to rest a hand on her hair. The silence stretched until it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Finally, Beau spoke, so low she had to strain to hear. "There's something I need to tell you, Maggie girl. Been carrying it near 35 years. Figured I'd take it to my grave." He paused, swallowed hard. "Reckon that grave might be closer than I thought." She lifted her head, heart thudding slow and heavy. "Beau Vance, if you're about to confess you had a wandering eye back in 58, I swear I will leave you down here myself." A ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. Ain't that? Worse, maybe. Or better. Depends on how you look. He shifted, wincing, and pointed a trembling finger toward the far wall, behind the metal shelving stacked with Vienna sausages and green beans. Third cinder block up from the floor, second row in, it's loose, always has been. Pull it out. Maggie stared at him a long moment, then rose on stiff legs and crossed the small space. The lantern threw her shadow huge and wavering across the wall. She wedged her fingers behind the block he'd indicated and pulled. It came free with a soft scrape, revealing a hollow space no bigger than a bread box. Inside sat a rusted ammunition tin she'd never seen before. Her hands shook as she carried it back and set it on Beau's lap. The hinges screamed when she opened it. Inside lay a pair of dog tags, tarnished but readable, a folded letter yellowed with age, and a small black and white photograph of a young soldier who looked almost, but not quite, like the man she'd married. Beau's voice came out raw. "That's not me, darling. That's the real Beauregard Vance. Died in my arms outside Chorwan, February 1953. I was just a grease monkey corporal named Arthur Miller from Lubbock, with nobody waiting on me back home. He had a letter from his daddy, big ranch, money, a girl named Maggie waiting on him. I switched our tags while the shells were still falling, walked out of that war wearing his name and his life." Maggie felt the floor tilt under her even though she was already sitting. 35 years, every kiss, every fight, every sunrise over their land, built on a lie. The photograph trembled in her fingers. The man in it had Beau's cheekbones, but the eyes were different. Harder, maybe, or maybe she was only seeing what she needed to see now. "I loved you the first minute I saw you standing on that train platform in your yellow dress," Beau, Arthur, whispered. "Didn't matter whose name I was wearing. Still don't." Tears slid hot down Maggie's cheeks, but she couldn't have said if they were from betrayal or relief or some strange mixture of both. The lantern flickered, throwing their shadows together against the wall. Two old people huddled in a concrete box, holding the truth like a live grenade. Above them, somewhere in the big house, a clock chimed once. Midnight, maybe, or 1 in the morning. Time didn't matter anymore. Maggie closed the tin, set it gently on the floor, and took both of Beau's hands in hers. They were cold, but they were real. "Then I reckon," she said, voice steady even as her world cracked wide open, "we got ourselves a whole new fight on our hands, Arthur Miller, and this time we ain't fighting blind." Maggie sat there on the cold concrete, the rusted ammunition tin between her feet like a sleeping rattlesnake. The lantern's weak light painted everything the color of old pennies, and for the longest time neither of them moved. The only sound was Beau's breathing, thin, wet, and too fast, and the steady drip, drip, drip that had started to feel like a clock counting down the rest of their lives. She turned the dog tags over in her palm. The raised letters read Vance Beaumont B. But the chain was tarnished almost black, and the edges were worn smooth from years of being touched in secret. 35 years. Every Christmas morning, every hospital room when Chip was born, every time Beau had kissed her temple and called her my Maggie girl, he'd been carrying this weight alone. "Arthur," she said, testing the name. It felt strange in her mouth, like trying on a coat that belonged to someone else. "Arthur Miller." He flinched at the sound as if she'd slapped him. "I stopped being Arthur the day I stepped off that troop train in Dallas. Folks were waiting with signs and flowers for Beaumont Vance. I just walked into his place. Nobody questioned it. War took so many. One more ghost didn't raise eyebrows." Maggie's throat ached. She wanted to be furious. She wanted to scream at him for stealing a dead man's life, for letting her love a stranger. But the anger wouldn't come, maybe because the man shivering under the wool blanket, was still the same one who'd carried her over every muddy threshold they'd ever crossed. Maybe because she was too damn tired, or maybe because, down here in the dark, truth felt less like a betrayal and more like the last solid thing left to hold on to. She set the dog tags back in the tin and closed the lid with a soft click. Chip's been tearing this family apart for something that was never his to begin with, she said, voice low and steady. All this ugliness for a name that ain't even real. Beau's eyes filled, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on his cheeks. I built it honest, Maggie. Every fence post, every oil well, every dime in that trust, I earned with these hands, just under the wrong name. She reached up and brushed the tears away with her thumb, the way she had 1,000 times when he'd come in from the range too tired to speak. Then we earned it together, Arthur. You and me, and our boy just locked us in a hole, thinking he's the rightful king of a kingdom that never existed. A long silence settled. Outside their little circle of light, the darkness seemed to lean in closer, listening. Beau's grip tightened on her hand. I always figured when I told you, if I ever told you, you'd hate me. Pack a bag and leave me sitting on the porch with nothing but that lie. Maggie gave a short, watery laugh that echoed off the walls. Beau, Arthur, honey, I married you for the way you looked at me like I hung the moon, not for some fancy pedigree. I stayed married to you because you worked yourself to the bone for this family and never once raised a hand to me or our boy. You think a name on a birth certificate changes any of that? He searched her face, scared to believe it. You mean that? I mean it more than I've ever meant anything in my life. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. But right now, that boy upstairs is planning to dance on our graves before we're even in 'em, and I am not letting him win. The change in her voice must have reached him, because Beau straightened a fraction, the old steel flickering back into his eyes. What are you thinking, Mags? I'm thinking the Vance Trust was written for the blood descendants of Beaumont Beauregard Vance. She picked up the tin again, cradling it like evidence in a courtroom. And the only Beaumont Vance is rotting in a military cemetery in Hawaii, which means every claim Chip's got just turned to smoke. Beau's breath hitched. You'd do that? Tear it all down? The company, the ranch, everything I'd burn it to the ground myself before I let him have one red cent he's willing to bury us for. The words came out fierce, surprising even her. This ain't about money anymore. It's about right and wrong. And our son crossed that line the minute he slammed this door. She eased herself up, knees popping loud in the stillness, and started moving with purpose. She found the battery radio on the top shelf, clicked it on, static, nothing but static, but the red power light glowed steady. Good. She located the flashlight, tested the beam, then rummaged until she found a stubby pencil and an old feed store receipt in the first aid kit. What are you doing? Beau asked. Planning. She knelt again, smoothing the receipt on the concrete. When he opens that door tomorrow, he's gonna see a broken old woman ready to sign whatever he puts in front of her. He'll be so busy crowing victory, he won't notice the trap till it snaps shut on his neck. Beau watched her scribble in the dim light, the pencil scratching out names, dates, ideas. Silas Graves, he said suddenly. Maggie's head snapped up. You read my mind. Silas hates everything the Vance name stands for, but he's hated Chip since the boy was 15 and tried to cheat him at poker. He'll help. And the letter in the tin, Beau added, voice gaining strength. It's notarized, dated 1953. Military records will back it up. One phone call to the right archivist in St. Louis, and we've got proof. Maggie nodded, writing faster. We play weak. We let him drag us upstairs, put the pen in my hand in front of the board. Then Silas walks in with the truth. Chip won't just lose the mineral rights, he'll lose everything. The trust dissolves, the company reverts to the state or the original charter beneficiaries. He'll be left holding a forged deed and a prison sentence. She paused, pencil hovering. It means we lose it too, Arthur. The ranch, the money, the name, gone. Beau reached out and covered her hand with his cold one. I lost the right to that name the day I stole it. And you never needed it. Look at me, Maggie. I'm sitting in the dark with the only thing that ever mattered to me. Long as I got you, the rest can go to hell. For the first time since the door slammed, Maggie felt something stronger than fear. It was small, but it was growing. A hard, bright coal of resolve right in the center of her chest. She folded the receipt carefully, tucked it into the tin with the letter and dog tags, and sealed their future inside that rusted box. Above them, the big house slept under its lie of a legacy. Down here, two old people who had nothing left to lose started planning how to bring the whole thing crashing down. And for the first time all night, Maggie smiled in the dark. The steel door opened at 7:30 the next morning, right on Chip's schedule, like he'd set an alarm to come gloat. A blade of golden hallway light cut down the ramp and sliced across the concrete floor, blinding after 14 hours of near dark. Maggie had been sitting with her back against the shelving, Beau's head cradled in her lap, both of them wrapped in the same two blankets. She'd made sure her eyes were red-rimmed and her hair hung in grey strings around her face. She wanted to look exactly like what Chip expected. A beaten woman, boots on concrete, slow, deliberate. Chip came down the ramp alone. Darla stayed at the top, arms folded, pearls flashing even in the dimness. He carried a stainless steel thermos of coffee in one hand and a triumphant smirk on his face that made Maggie want to bite through her own tongue to keep from speaking too soon. "Well, good morning, Mama," he drawled, syrupy sweet. "Sleep okay?" Maggie lifted her head slowly, letting her lip tremble. She didn't have to fake the exhaustion. Every muscle felt like it had been dragged behind a pickup for 10 miles. "We're alive," she croaked. "That's about all I can say." Beau stirred against her, giving a weak cough that rattled in his chest. Perfect timing. Chip's gaze flicked to his father, and for one flicker, Maggie thought she saw something like shame. Then it was gone, replaced by cool calculation. "Coffee?" Chip unscrewed the lid and waved the thermos under her nose. The smell nearly broke her. Real coffee, chicory and strong, the way Rosa made it upstairs. "Figured you'd be reasonable after a night to think things over." Maggie swallowed hard, let her shoulders sag. "I'm done fighting, Chip. You win." She pushed herself up, knees popping loud in the silence, and reached to help Beau. "Just get your daddy out of this hole before the damp finishes him." Chip set the thermos down and moved to the wheelchair, righting it with exaggerated care. Maggie watched his hands. Those were the same hands that had shoved his father down the ramp the night before. She filed the image away like a bullet in a chamber. Together they got Beau settled. He kept his head down, playing the frail old man to perfection, but Maggie felt the tremor in his fingers when they brushed hers. Not weakness, but rage held on a very short leash. Chip pushed the chair up the ramp. Every bump made Beau wince theatrically, and Maggie shuffled behind them, hugging herself like a woman who'd had the fight whipped out of her. At the top, Darla stepped aside with a thin, satisfied smile that made Maggie want to slap the taste out of her mouth. She didn't. Not yet. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, bright and merciless after the tomb. Rosa, the housekeeper who'd been with them 25 years, stood at the sink with her back stiff, pretending to scrub a pan that was already clean. She wouldn't look at any of them. Good. Rosa had ears like a bat and a heart loyal to Maggie. Whatever she overheard would travel exactly where it needed to. Chip wheeled Beau into the breakfast nook and parked him at the table like a king granting an audience. "Now," he said, pulling a fresh set of documents from a manila folder, "we're going to do this nice and legal. You sign the mineral rights over to the holding company I set up, and everybody goes on about their day. No lawyers, no board meeting, no fuss, just family taking care of family." Maggie let her gaze drift over the papers, then up to his face. She made her eyes soft, watery, defeated. "If I sign this today, will you swear on your daddy's life you'll never lay hands on us again?" Chip's smile faltered for half a heartbeat. "Mama, come on, it was one night. You forced my hand." She nodded slowly as if swallowing broken glass. "One night was enough." She reached for the pen he offered, letting her fingers shake. "But I want it done proper, in front of the board. Tomorrow, I'm not putting my name on anything that could be questioned later. Folks already whisper plenty about you, Chip. Let's give 'em nothing to chew on." Darla started to protest. Maggie saw it in the flare of her nostrils, but Chip held up a hand. He was thinking, calculating. A public signing in the boardroom meant witnesses, meant legitimacy, meant no one could ever claim he coerced her. It would look like a gracious retirement, mother passing the torch to son. His vanity did the rest. "Tomorrow, then," he said, smug again. 11 o'clock. I'll have the notary there. You get a good night's sleep upstairs, take a long bath, put on that blue dress you like. We'll make it a celebration." Maggie gave him the ghost of a smile. "A celebration," she echoed, voice brittle. He leaned down and kissed her cheek, dry, perfunctory, the way a man kisses an obligation. Then he straightened, already turning away, already tasting victory. "Rosa, I'll bring y'all some breakfast. I've got calls to make." He and Darla swept out, their footsteps echoing down the hall toward the study where the good bourbon lived. The front door opened and closed a minute later, Darla going to Neiman's no doubt, to buy something expensive to wear when she became the new queen of the Vance empire. The second they were gone, Maggie's spine straightened like someone had poured steel down it. She looked at Beau, he looked back, eyes bright for the first time since the ramp. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow," he agreed. Rosa appeared in the doorway, dark eyes wide with worry and questions she didn't dare ask out loud. Maggie gave her the smallest nod, message received. Rosa pressed a hand to her heart, then disappeared toward the back stairs. Maggie poured 2 cups of the coffee Chip had left behind, carried one to Beau and wrapped his cold fingers around it. Then she stood at the kitchen window and watched the long gravel drive until Chip's Cadillac disappeared in a cloud of dust. One more day, one more performance. And then the kingdom would burn. Maggie waited until the house settled into its afternoon hush, the big grandfather clock in the hall ticking like a heartbeat. Rosa had brought them soft scrambled eggs and buttered toast, then vanished upstairs to change linens, which Maggie knew meant keeping watch from the landing so no one surprised them. Beau dozed in the sunlit breakfast nook, worn thin by the night, but his colour was better now that warm air and real food had reached him. Maggie kissed his forehead, whispered, "Rest, love," and slipped away. She moved like a woman half her age, quiet and quick, down the back hall to the little telephone alcove tucked under the stairs. The rotary phone was avocado green, older than Chip, its cord still tangled from the last time someone had paced while talking. She hadn't dialed this number in 20 years, but her fingers remembered every click and whir. 1 ring, 2. "Graves and Associates." A crisp Dallas voice answered. "Silas Graves, please. Tell him it's Maggie Vance and tell him it can't wait." A pause, then the click of a transferred call. She could picture Silas in his high-rise office, boots on the desk, Stetson hanging on the antler rack, probably nursing the same bourbon he'd nursed since Lyndon Johnson was president. Maggie. His drawl was pure East Texas gravel. Lord, woman, I thought you fell off the planet. What's wrong? She kept her voice low, steady, but let the steel show through. Silas, I need you at the ranch tomorrow morning, 10:30 sharp. Bring your nastiest briefcase, a notary you trust with your life, and every copy of the Vance family trust you can lay hands on. The original charter, the amendments, everything. Silence on the line, thick enough to spread on toast. Finally, you fixin' to blow the whole thing up, aren't you? Reckon I am, she said. My boy locked Beau and me in the storm shelter last night to force me to sign over the mineral rights. Left us there like yesterday's garbage. I'm done protecting him. She heard the creak of his chair as he sat forward. Jesus Christ, Maggie. There's more, she continued, glancing toward the hallway to be sure no footsteps were coming. Beau's got something to tell, something that changes the bloodline claim. I need you here before the board meeting at 11. I'm going to hand Chip the pen, let him think he's won, and then we drop the truth on him in front of God and every investor who's ever kissed his boots. Another long beat. She could almost hear Silas grinning like a coyote. I'll be there at 10, he said, and Maggie, I'm bringing the biggest can of gasoline I own. That little bastard's been needing to come to Jesus for years. She exhaled, a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Thank you, Silas. Don't thank me yet. Thank me tomorrow when he's crying in his imported loafers. The line went dead. Maggie hung up, pressed her forehead to the cool wall for a moment, and felt the last piece click into place. She spent the rest of the afternoon playing her part to perfection. She let Rosa help her into the clawfoot tub, soaked until her fingers pruned, then put on the softest robe and let her hair hang loose and grey down her back. When Chip poked his head in around 4, asking if she needed anything from town, she gave him a wan smile and said, "Just some peace, honey," and watched his chest puff up with victory. Dinner was quiet. Chip talked numbers and drilling schedules. Darla scrolled through fabric swatches on her phone for new drapes in the soon-to-be-hers master suite, and Maggie picked at her chicken fried steak like a woman who'd lost her appetite for living. Beau stayed mostly silent, eyes on his plate, but once when Chip was crowing about a new lease bonus, Beau's hand found Maggie's under the table and squeezed once. We're almost there. After the dishes, Chip announced he and Darla were heading to the country club to celebrate early with some partners. The screen door slapped shut behind them, taillights disappearing down the drive. Maggie waited 5 full minutes, then moved. She and Beau went to their bedroom, the one with the big 4-poster they'd bought on their 10th anniversary, and shut the door. She pulled the ammunition tin from the bottom drawer where she'd hidden it under winter sweaters. Together they laid the contents on the chenille bedspread. The dog tags, the letter in Beau's younger handwriting, the photograph of a man who looked enough like him to fool a grieving nation. Beau traced the photo with a trembling finger. I kept thinking one day I'd burn all this, couldn't ever bring myself to... Maggie folded his hand closed over the picture. Tomorrow it stops being a secret and starts being justice. She took the yellow legal pad from the nightstand and wrote 2 letters in her careful schoolteacher cursive, one to the board, one to the Dallas Morning News, just in case things went sideways. Then she tucked everything back into the tin and slid it into the false bottom of her largest purse, the navy leather one she carried to funerals and baptisms. At 10 o'clock, she helped Beau into bed, pulled the quilt up to his chin, and crawled in beside him like they'd done for 40 years. Only this time she didn't sleep. She lay listening to the house creak and settle, to the cicadas outside, to the man beside her breathing slow and steady. She thought about the girl she'd been in 1949, waiting on a train platform in a yellow cotton dress. Heart hammering. because the soldier stepping off the train had smiled at her like she was the only woman in Texas. Arthur Miller or Beaumont Vance didn't matter. He was still the man who'd chosen her every single day since. Just before dawn, she pressed her lips to his temple and whispered, "Tomorrow we take our life back, love. Whatever's left of it." He turned, found her hand in the dark, and held on tight. Outside, the first pink light touched the mesquite trees, and somewhere down the hall, the grandfather clock began to chime the hour. 10:30 was coming, and Maggie Vance, soon to be Maggie Miller and finally free, was ready. The boardroom smelled like money and old cigars, same as it had since Beau had the table custom made from a single slab of black walnut back in 1972. 10 men and 2 women sat around it now. Boots polished, ties knotted tight, coffee steaming in heavy china cups. Investors, lawyers, the bank president, a couple of cousins who still held minor shares. Every one of them had come to watch Maggie Vance sign away the future. Chip stood at the head of the table like a groom at his own wedding, grinning so wide his face looked ready to split. Darla perched beside him in a cream linen suit that probably cost more than Rosa made in a year, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. The documents lay in front of Maggie in a neat stack, already flagged with little red "Sign Here" arrows. A notary in a cheap grey suit hovered with her seal and stamp, ready to make it official. Maggie sat in her usual chair to Beau's right, hands folded in her lap, wearing the navy dress she'd worn to her own mother's funeral. It hung looser now, but the colour still made her eyes look fierce. Beau was beside her in his Sunday suit, hair combed, face shaved, looking every inch the patriarch, even if his hands shook a little on the wheelchair arms. No one in the room had commented on the faint bruise blooming along his temple. Texans are polite that way. Chip cleared his throat, ready to give the little speech he'd probably practiced in the mirror. "Before we get started," he began, voice rich with fake humility, "I just want to say how much this means. Mother has steered this company through good times and bad, and now she's chosen to pass the reins to the next generation. It's a proud day for the Vance family." The side door opened without a knock. Silas Graves stepped through like a cold front rolling across the plains. Tall, raw-boned, 70 if he was a day, wearing a black Stetson and a look that could curdle milk. Behind him came his paralegal, a young woman with a briefcase the size of a saddle, and the notary Maggie had asked for, Mrs. Alvarez from Waxahachie, who went to the same Baptist church and could keep a secret better than most priests. Chip's smile faltered. "Silas, we weren't expecting you." "Funny." Silas Draw Shi Yin Lee led, hanging his hat on the rack with deliberate care. "Maggie invited me, said there might be some irregularities need clearing up." A nervous rustle went around the table. Men shifted in their seats. Darla's hand tightened on Chip's arm. Maggie lifted her chin. "I believe we should wait until everyone's present before we sign anything life-changing." Chip forced the smile back in place. "Mama, this is just a formality." "Let the woman speak." "Chip?" said Harlan Tate, the bank president, who'd known Maggie since she was cashing her first widow's pension check. "We got time." Silas pulled out the chair directly across from Chip and sat like a man settling in for a long fight. His paralegal opened the briefcase and began laying out folders thick enough to choke a calf. Chip's eyes darted to the clock above the mantel. 10:57. 3 minutes to 11. He leaned over the table toward Maggie, lowering his voice to something almost gentle. "Mama, don't do this. Whatever you think you're pulling, it's not too late to stop." Maggie met his gaze, calm as Sunday morning. "Oh, honey," she said softly, "it was too late the minute you locked that door." She reached for the pen anyway. the same heavy silver one Beau had used to sign the first big drilling lease in '69. Chip's shoulders loosened a fraction. Triumph flashed across his face again. Maggie turned the document toward her, flipped to the last page, and held the pen just above the signature line. Every eye in the room locked on that pen. She looked up straight at Chip and smiled the smallest, saddest smile he'd probably ever seen from her. "There is no next generation of Vances," she said, clear as chapel bells. Then she laid the pen down without signing a thing. A shocked murmur rippled around the table. Darla gasped like someone had pinched her. Chip's face went the color of spoiled milk. Silas leaned back and folded his arms. "Gentlemen, ladies," he drawled, "Mrs. Vance has asked me to read a statement into the record before any signatures are collected. I reckon you all will want to hear it." He opened the first folder, took out a single sheet of onion skin paper yellowed with age, and began to read in a voice that carried to the rafters. "My name is Arthur David Miller, Corporal, U.S. Army, serial number—" The room went dead still. Beau closed his eyes, shoulders sagging with a relief. 35 years in the making. Maggie reached over and took his hand, lacing their fingers tight. Chip stared at his father like he was seeing a ghost, and outside the tall windows, the Texas sun kept shining down on a legacy that, in the next 5 minutes, was about to turn to ash. Silas Graves didn't rush. He let the silence stretch until it was painful, the way a good rancher lets a calf tire itself out on the rope before he brands it. Then he slid the 1953 letter across the polished walnut, so every soul at the table could see Beau's younger handwriting, confessing the switch in that frozen Korean trench. Next came the dog tags, clinking softly as he laid them beside the letter like evidence in a murder trial. Then the military death certificate for Beaumont Beauregard Vance, stamped in red ink, killed in action. Finally, a fresh forensic report, still warm from the copier, proving the deed Chip had waved around for weeks, was printed on paper that didn't exist until 2018. Chip's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Silas kept talking, slow and relentless. The Vance Family Trust, as written in 1923 and amended in 1941, passes only to the direct blood descendants of Beaumont B. Vance, Sr. No blood, no claim. Simple as that. The man you've all called Beau Vance for 40 years is a decorated veteran named Arthur Miller. He built this company with sweat and honesty, but he never had a legal right to the name or the original charter, which makes every share, every lease, every mineral right held in the name of Chip Vance. Well, let's just say the technical term is fraudulent as hell. A collective inhale sucked half the air out of the room. Harlan Tate took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes like he was trying to wake up from a bad dream. One of the cousins started muttering the Lord's Prayer under his breath. Chip finally found his voice. It came out high, cracked, nothing like the big man he'd been 5 minutes ago. "Mama, tell me this is a joke. Tell me you're not doing this." Maggie rose slowly from her chair. Every eye followed her. She was 62, bone-tired, and still the tallest person in the room when she straightened her spine. "Mama," she repeated, tasting the word and finding it bitter. "You lost the right to call me that when you shoved your daddy down a concrete ramp and locked us in the dark like animals." She turned to the table, voice steady, almost gentle, the way a mother talks to a child who's broken something precious. "Arthur and I built a life on a borrowed name. We raised a son who learned greed faster than he learned gratitude. Yesterday, that son decided our lives were worth less than his debts. So today, I'm giving him exactly what he's entitled to under the real terms of the trust." She nodded toward Silas. "Which is nothing." Darla shot to her feet, chair scraping loud. This is insane. We have lawyers. We have. Sit down, Darla, Maggie said. Quiet, but sharp enough to cut glass. Darla sat. Chip's face had gone from white to red to something in between, veins standing out at his temples. He lunged across the table, scattering papers, grabbing for the dog tags like he could make them disappear if he crushed them hard enough. You can't, he shouted. You'll ruin everything. The company, the ranch. The company and the ranch were never yours to lose, Maggie said. They were borrowed, same as the name on the sign out front, and borrowing time just ran out. Beau spoke for the first time, voice raspy but clear enough to carry. I'm sorry, son. I thought keeping the secret would protect you. Turns out the secret was the only thing left worth protecting you from. Chip wheeled on him, eyes wild. You're not my father. You said it yourself. You stole everything. Beau flinched like he'd been slapped, but he didn't look away. I gave you a home, a name, every chance in the world. I loved you every day you let me. That part wasn't stolen. The room was chaos now. Men standing, women whispering, someone already on a phone calling their own attorneys. Silas raised one hand and the noise dropped like a blanket. Sheriff's on his way, he announced calmly. Felony forgery, elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment. Plenty to get started. Chip, Darla, I'd suggest you stay right where you are. Chip looked around the table and saw what was left of his empire crumbling in real time. Investors were already edging toward the door, distancing themselves like men stepping back from a snake. Harlan Tate shook his head slow and sad. The way you do when a prize bull goes lame and has to be put down. Chip's knees buckled. He caught the edge of the table to keep from falling. For one heartbeat, Maggie thought he might beg. Instead, something colder settled over his face. You'll be sorry, he hissed, staring straight at her. You think this makes you noble. You just threw away everything we had. You're nothing without the Vance name. Nothing. Maggie stepped close enough that only he could hear her next words. I was never anything with it, she said. Turns out I'm just finding that out now. She turned her back on him, slow, deliberate, and walked to the tall windows overlooking the south pasture, the same view she'd looked at every morning for 40 years. Only now the light felt different, cleaner. Behind her, the sheriff's deputies came through the door. Boots heavy on the hardwood, handcuffs clinked. Darla started crying, loud and theatrical. Chip didn't make a sound as they led him past his mother without looking at her again. The last thing he saw before they took him out was Maggie, standing in the sunlight, shoulders square, chin high, holding her husband's hand like it was the only thing that had ever been real. And for the first time in her life, Maggie Vance, soon to be Miller, felt the full weight of freedom settle on her like grace. The morning after the boardroom fell apart, the ranch looked exactly the same and nothing like home. The same red cattle grazed under the same live oaks. The same windmill creaked in the same south breeze, but every Vance land and cattle sign felt like a lie someone had forgotten to take down. Reporters camped at the gate by 8 o'clock. Satellite trucks lined up like buzzards. Maggie watched them from the kitchen window, coffee cooling in her hand, and felt strangely calm. Chip and Darla had vanished before sunup. Word was they'd thrown Louis Vuitton into the trunk of the Cadillac and pointed it toward Oklahoma, figuring Texas would be too hot for a while. The sheriff had warrants waiting, but Maggie wasn't holding her breath. Some snakes just slither off into the tall grass and you let them go. By noon, the phone started ringing off the hook. Lawyers, bankers, old friends who suddenly remembered they were allergic to scandal. Silas Graves handled most of it from his office in Dallas, voice like a bear with a sore paw, scaring folks into hanging up fast. The trust was dissolving faster than sugar in hot tea, assets frozen, leases suspended. The whole house of cards folding in on itself. It should have felt like dying. Instead, it felt like waking up. Maggie spent the afternoon in the bedroom she'd shared with Beau for 40 years, packing 2 suitcases and 1 cardboard box. Photographs, her mother's Bible, the quilt her grandma pieced from feed sack cotton. Nothing that said Vance on it. She left the silver, the china, the oil portraits of men who'd never existed. Those belonged to ghosts. Beau sat in his chair by the window, watching dust motes dance in the light. He hadn't said much since the boardroom. Every now and then he'd reach for her hand, squeeze once and let go. That was enough. Rosa found them there at dusk, eyes red from crying. "Miss Maggie, the auctioneer's coming tomorrow to tag what sells. Where will you go?" Maggie smiled, the first real one in days. "Got a little place picked out. You'll see." The cottage sat on the far northwest corner of the original ranch, 2 miles past the windmill, where the creek bent and the pecans grew thick. It had been the foreman's house once, back when the ranch ran 10,000 head instead of one rich man's ego. White clapboard, tin roof, a porch swing that creaked like an old hymn. They'd kept it painted and the plumbing working because Maggie never threw anything useful away. Now it was going to be home. They moved in 3 weeks later with what fit in the back of Silas's pickup and Rosa's old Suburban. The big house sold at auction to a tech billionaire from California who wanted to turn it into a wellness retreat. Maggie signed the papers without looking back. Chip never called. Once a postcard came from Tulsa. No return address, just a blurry photo of a casino and the words "I hope you're happy now" scrawled on the back. She burned it in the sink and didn't bother telling Beau. The first winter was hard. Beau's lungs never quite recovered from that night in the damp. He caught pneumonia in February and slipped away on a Tuesday morning while Maggie held his hand and the Cardinals argued outside the window. She buried him under a simple granite stone on the hill above the creek. The marker read, "Arthur David Miller, beloved husband, father, friend." He earned every day he lived. No dates, no military honors, just the truth. Folks said she'd be lost without him. They were wrong. Maggie rose with the sun, fed the chickens she'd bought on a whim, tended the vegetable garden that finally grew whatever she felt like, instead of what looked impressive from the big house veranda. She joined the library board in town, taught Sunday school to the middle schoolers who thought her stories about the war and the oil boom were better than television. On Saturdays, she drove into Dallas and had lunch with Silas, who pretended he wasn't sweet on her and failed every time. Some evenings, she sat on the porch swing with a glass of sweet tea and listened to the quiet. No hum of generators, no helicopters overhead, no parties spilling out onto the lawn, just wind in the pecans and the creek talking to itself. She'd think about the girl in the yellow dress waiting on that train platform in 1949, heart so full it hurt, and she'd smile. That girl got more than she ever dreamed, and she got it honest in the end. One spring day, almost a year to the day the boardroom burned down, Maggie carried a folding chair and a can of white paint down to the storm shelter. The big steel door was still there, half hidden under yaupon and rust. She pried it open, let the sunlight pour down the ramp for the first time since that night, and painted over the last Vance stencil in big, careful letters. Miller's Root Cellar Est. 2025, enter as guests, leave as friends. Then she hauled up every crate of peaches and beans, every dusty blanket, every reminder of the tomb it had been, and gave them to the Baptist church for hurricane kits. When she was done, she stood at the top of the ramp, hands on her hips, and looked out over land that was no longer hers by deed, but was hers by every blister and laugh and tear she'd spent on it. The past was buried decently. The future was whatever she decided to grow next. and Maggie Miller, 64, widowed, penniless by Highland Park standards, and freer than she'd ever been in her life, closed the door on the cellar, latched it gentle-like, and walked back up the hill to the little white house that finally, truly belonged to her. The sun was slipping low behind the pecan trees when Maggie came back from the root cellar, paint still on her fingers and a lightness in her step she hadn't felt since she was 30. The sky had gone that soft Texas pink that makes you forgive the heat of the day, and the swing on the porch creaked an invitation. She took it, set her tea on the rail, and let the evening settle over her like a well-worn quilt. The cottage looked nothing like the big house and everything like home. White clabbered, glowing in the last light, red geraniums spilling out of whiskey barrels, wind chimes Rosa had brought from San Antonio singing in the breeze. Inside, the rooms were small and crowded with the things that mattered. Beau's old rocking chair by the fireplace, the pie-safe painted robin's egg blue, the shelf of photographs, Chip at 6 with a missing front tooth, Beau in his army uniform the day he came home, Maggie in that yellow dress the day she stopped being a girl and started being a wife. She had started writing the story 6 months after Beau's funeral. Not for money, Lord knows there wasn't much of that, but because the words kept crowding her head at night and the only way to quiet them was to put them on paper. She wrote in longhand on yellow legal pads in the sunroom while the coffee percolated and the cardinals fussed at the feeder. When the stack got tall enough, Silas drove out one Saturday with a bottle of good bourbon and a friend who knew a publisher in New York. They titled it The Lies We Inherit. Maggie laughed when she saw the cover mock-up. Simple cream stock. Her name in plain letters, no silhouette of a ranch gate or dramatic sky. Just the truth, finally wearing its own face. The book came out quiet. No big tour, no morning shows. Just a small printing that somehow found its way into beauty shops and church libraries and the purses of women who'd buried husbands, raised ungrateful children, and still got up every morning to put the coffee on. Letters started arriving, thick envelopes on lilac stationery, thin ones in shaky handwriting. Women telling her their own versions of the storm shelter, the son who stole the farm, the daughter who never called, the husband who left and the one who stayed but might as well have left. Maggie answered everyone. Some weeks she wrote until her hand cramped. She told them what she had learned in the dark, that legacy isn't land or money or a name carved in stone. It's the choice, every single day, to love what's in front of you harder than you hate what's behind you. One October afternoon, a familiar Cadillac, older now, dented fender, Oklahoma plates, turned slow into the gravel drive. Maggie was on the porch snapping beans for supper. She didn't stand up, didn't wave, just kept snapping, letting the pieces fall into the bowl like green rain. Chip got out alone. Thinner, hair gone grey at the temples. The expensive watch was gone, replaced by a cheap leather band. He stood at the bottom step a long time, hands in the pockets of a plain cotton shirt, looking every bit the stranger he'd made himself. "Afternoon, Mama," he said finally, voice rough from disuse or shame, maybe both. Maggie kept snapping. "It's Maggie now, or Mrs. Miller if you need to be formal." He flinched, but he climbed the steps and stopped a respectful distance away. "Read your book," he said. "That's so. Every page felt like you were standing over me with a switch." "Good," she said, mild as milk. "Means I wrote it right." Silence stretched. The wind chimes filled it. "I'm sober," he offered. 2 years in April. Work at a parts store in Tulsa. Darla left when the money did. Guess that's fair." Maggie set the bowl aside and looked at him, really looked, for the first time in years. The boy was still in there somewhere, behind the broken veins and the tired eyes. She felt the old ache, the one that never quite leaves a mother's chest, but it didn't cut like it used to. "You come to ask forgiveness?" she asked. "I don't reckon I've earned that yet," he said. "Just wanted to see if the door was still open a crack." She studied him a long minute. Then she reached for the second rocker, the one Beau used to sit in, and pushed it toward him with her foot. "Sit," she said. "Beans need finishing. Supper's pinto beans and cornbread. You can stay for that if you want. After, we'll see." Chip sat like a man afraid the chair might bite him. He took the bowl when she handed it over, fingers brushing hers for the first time since he was 12, and thought holding hands was embarrassing. They snapped beans together while the sky went lavender and the first star came out. Neither of them spoke of the shelter or the boardroom or the years in between. Some things are too big for one evening, but when the beans were done and the cornbread came out golden from the oven, Maggie set an extra plate without being asked. Later, after he'd eaten 2 helpings and the dishes were washed, Chip stood on the porch with his hat in his hands. "I'll come back if you'll let me," he said. Maggie leaned against the door frame, arms folded, the porch light catching the silver in her hair. "Door's open, Chip, but you walk through it as yourself. No name you didn't earn, no pride you can't swallow. That's the only way this works." He nodded, eyes wet. "Yes, Mom." He drove away slow, taillights disappearing around the bend by the creek. Maggie watched until they were gone, then went inside and added one more line to the yellow legal pad on the table. Some legacies aren't inherited, some are chosen one humble day at a time, and that's the only kind worth having. She closed the pad, turned off the lamp, and went to bed in the little white house that finally, truly, belonged to her. Outside, the Texas stars kept watch, same as they always had, over a woman who had lost everything the world counts, dear, and found the only thing that ever mattered. Her own name, spoken clear and unafraid into the quiet night, and that was enough.